Good morning, children. So this is part 3 of the chapter Dissolution of a Partnership Firm. In the previous 2 videos, we have learnt about dissolution, its meaning, its modes, and also the accounts which are prepared at the time of dissolution, the entries related to realization, workmen compensation reserve, etc. So in this part, we are going to do 2 practical questions on the basis of concepts which we have discussed earlier. So let us start. So this is question number 1 of your book only, practical question number 1. Manoj and Nand were partners sharing profits in the ratio of 3:2. Pass journal entries under the following situations at the time of dissolution of firm. So the first situation is that when the workmen compensation reserve stood at rupees 1 lakh and there was no liability towards workmen compensation. So this is a case when there is no claim against WCR, that is workmen compensation reserve. So in this case, the entire amount of 1 lakh rupees will be distributed among Manoj and Nand in the ratio of 3:2, and the entry for this will be workmen compensation reserve account debited 1 lakh to Manoj's capital account, to Nand's capital account in the ratio of 3:2. Then case number 2 is workmen compensation reserve stood at rupees 1 lakh and liability in respect of it was ascertained at rupees 75,000. So out of this 1 lakh, 75,000 will be transferred to realization, and remaining 25,000 will be distributed among the partners Manoj and Nand in the ratio of 3:2 by way of surplus. Then case number 3, workmen compensation reserve stood at rupees 1 lakh and liability in respect of it was ascertained at rupees 1 lakh 20,000. So in this case, the entire amount of rupees 1 lakh will be transferred to realization account and nothing will be distributed among the partners. And case number 4, workmen compensation reserve stood at rupees 1 lakh and liability in respect of it was ascertained at rupees 1 lakh. That means the liability was equal to the reserve. So hence there is no surplus in the reserve left, and therefore in this case also the entire amount of reserve will be transferred to realization account and nothing will be distributed among the partners. So let us have a look at the journal entries. So as you can see, the first case, when there was no claim on workmen compensation reserve, the entire reserve of rupees 1 lakh is distributed among Manoj and Nand in their profit sharing ratio. That means the entry would be workmen compensation reserve account debited rupees 1 lakh to Manoj capital 60,000 and to Nand's capital 40,000. That is in the ratio of 3:2. Then second is the case when the claim was amounting to rupees 75,000 but the reserve was amounting to 1 lakh. So in this case, 75,000, that is the amount of claim, will be transferred to realization account and the entry will be workmen compensation reserve account debited 75,000 to realization account 75,000, and remaining 25,000 will be distributed among the partners in the ratio of 3:2, that is their PSR. So entry would be workmen compensation reserve account debited 25,000 to Manoj's capital 15,000 to Nand's capital 10,000. Or else you can also pass a combined entry for these 2 entries, that is workmen compensation reserve account 1 lakh debited 1 lakh to realization account 75,000 to Manoj's capital account 15,000 and to Nand's capital account 10,000. And the third entry which is passed here, C, is for the payment of liability. So the liability was amounting to rupees 75,000. So the payment of liability would be realization account debited, since the reserve is already being transferred to the realization account, the liability. So therefore realization account debited to bank account. Then case number 3, when the amount of claim is more than the workmen compensation reserve. So in this case, the liability was equal to 1,20,000 whereas the reserve was equal to only 1 lakh. So the entire amount of reserve will be transferred to realization account and the entry would be workmen compensation reserve account debited 1 lakh to realization account 1 lakh. And secondly, the entry is for the payment of the claim. That is realization account, since the liability is already transferred to realization account, to bank account since the money is going out. The next entry is for the next case, that is when the amount of claim is equal to the amount of reserve. So in this case, there is a liability of 1 lakh and the reserve is also for 1 lakh. So entire amount of reserve will be transferred to realization account, the entry for which will be workmen compensation reserve account debited rupees 1 lakh to realization account rupees 1 lakh. And the other entry is for the liability, the claim paid. And since the liability is already transferred to realization account, therefore the entry for payment will be realization account debited 1 lakh to bank account 1 lakh. So I hope this question is clear to you children. This is very easy and simply based on the cases of workmen compensation reserve. Now the next question. This is practical question number 3 again from your book D.K. Goel. You have to pass necessary journal entries on the dissolution of a partnership firm in the following cases. So case number 1, L, a partner, was appointed to look after the dissolution process for which he was given a remuneration of 10,000. That means L is responsible for the dissolution expenses for which he is given a fixed remuneration for 10,000. So the entry will be realization account debited 10,000 to L's capital account 10,000. The second case is dissolution expenses 8,000 were paid by the partner M. So since it is not mentioned that whether it is borne by M or not, so we will assume that it is paid by M on the behalf of the firm. So entry here will be realization account debited 8,000 to M's capital account 8,000. The third case is dissolution expenses were rupees 5,000. Nothing is mentioned, so we will assume that these are paid by the firm. So the entry for it will be realization account debited 5,000 to cash or bank account 5,000. Then point number 4, P, a partner, was appointed to look after the process of dissolution for which he was allowed a remuneration of 7,000. P agreed to bear the dissolution expenses and actual dissolution expenses were rupees 4,000 which were paid by P. So in this case, since the dissolution work is assigned to the partner P and a fixed remuneration has been decided rupees 7,000, so if the partner spends lesser than this from his pocket, then too we will give him the fixed remuneration. So the entry in this case will be realization account debited 7,000 to P's capital account 7,000. Then point number 5. N, a partner, was appointed to look after the process of dissolution for which he was allowed a remuneration of 9,000. N agreed to bear the dissolution expenses. Actual dissolution expenses rupees 4,000 were paid by the firm. So in this situation, N is the partner who is responsible, who has to bear the dissolution expenses for which he will be given 9,000 rupees as fixed remuneration. Whereas in such a situation and such a condition, 4,000 dissolution expenses were incurred and these were for the time being paid by the firm. So that means here 4,000 dissolution expenses the firm has paid on behalf of N, and also the firm is liable to give 9,000 rupees as fixed remuneration to N for the work of dissolution. So 4,000 already the firm has paid out of the pockets. So out of 9,000, 4,000 will not be given by firm. Now the firm will give only 5,000. So in this case, realization account will be debited by rupees 9,000. Then to N's capital rupees 5,000 because he was supposed to bear it but he didn't bear it. And to cash or bank account 4,000 because this is ultimately borne by the or basically paid by the firm for the time being. Then point number 6. Q, a partner, was appointed to look after the process of dissolution for which he was allowed a remuneration of rupees 18,000. Q agreed to take over stock worth rupees 18,000 as his remuneration. The stock had already been transferred to realization account. So in this case, if you see, Q, a partner, is allowed to look after the process of dissolution and the expenses, and he is to be allowed as rupees 18,000 as the dissolution fixed remuneration. But he has agreed that instead of getting it in cash or something, he will take the stock, and which is already taken transferred to realization account. So if we pass the entry, since this 18,000 is an expense on account of realization, so realization account should be debited with 18,000. 2, since he is taking the asset, so asset needs to be credited, but since the asset is already transferred to the realization account, so instead of asset we will again credit realization. So the entry will be formed as realization account debited 18,000 to realization account 18,000. So both the aspects to be debited and credited is realization account. Hence in this case there will be no entry. So I have explained you all the cases here. Now let us see the solution. So case number 1, when the remuneration fixed was given to L, who was responsible for realized expenses, and the entry will be realization account debited 10,000 to L's capital account 10,000. Then the second aspect, realization expenses 8,000 was paid by M. So the entry will be realization account debited to M's capital account 8,000 and 8,000. Then the third entry, the third case, when nothing was mentioned, only the amount of dissolution expenses was mentioned, and therefore we have assumed that these are paid by the firm only. So the entry will be realization account debited 5,000 to bank account 5,000. Then the fourth case, when the fixed remuneration was given to P, the entry will be realization account debited 7,000 to P's capital account 7,000, as we have already discussed the logic. Then in the fifth case, N, a partner, was responsible for the dissolution expenses. He was allowed a fixed remuneration of rupees 9,000, and for the time being the dissolution expenses were rupees 4,000, which were paid by the firm. So instead of giving the fixed remuneration of 9,000, 4,000 the firm will not give, since the firm is actually paying it for the time being on behalf of the partner. So the remaining 5,000 will be given to N. So the entry will be realization account debited 9,000 to N's capital account 5,000 to bank account 4,000. And in the sixth case, a partner was responsible for the dissolution expenses. He was allowed 18,000 as fixed remuneration, in place of which he agreed to accept stock which was already transferred to realization account. So therefore, since both the debit and credit aspect is realization account only with the same amount, therefore there will be no entry passed. So I hope these two questions are clear to you. These are very simple questions based on the concepts which we have discussed earlier. Now this is the assignment based on this part. You have to answer the following questions in your register. You have to redo the questions taught in this video. The two questions, practical question 1 and practical question 3 from your book. You have to redo them in your registers. And question number 2, you have to solve practical question number 2 from the chapter Dissolution of Partnership Firm from your accounts book by D.K. Goel, volume 1. So go through the video once again, children, revise the work and do solve the questions. Thank you.